Obviously, you all know how to use the chat box. We've been doing this for a while, so. Okay, I just want to make sure you can hear me. Can you all hear me? So I didn't mute myself. Okay, good. Well, at least one person. All right, so as we left off last, we're actually going to spend the bulk of our time today doing a data validation, which was really the topic for today, and just to go over some basic date functions. But I kind of felt towards the end last time, I gave a bit of a short shrift to pivots. And while we're not going to, at some point in future sessions, we may want to do just a whole session drilling down on pivots and some of the pivot details. I just thought I would take you through some of the stuff again. I had laid out some stuff in advance. You all have the templates, so you've seen this. And I gave you a whole bunch of different examples. But the one we're going to look at is actually the sample that I developed that looks at supplies by campus, by the various campuses of the University of Southern Mississippi. And so I did a little bit of the work in advance here, but I'll basically show you what I did by blanking it out. So what we have here are a pivot table. So basically the way I would do that, and again, since I already have my data, is highlight the data. I would go to Insert, and I would select Pivot Table. When I select Pivot Table, it's going to ask me, do I want it in a new sheet or an existing sheet? And I would say New Sheet, and that's going to create a tab. But I already did that just to save a little bit of time. And what you're normally going to get after you do that is a blank. So basically, you're going to get this, and you're going to get your Pivot Table Builder. So what you want to do is select the items you need. And here, although we have 4 parameters, really the only ones that really matter are campus, category, and cost. And what Excel does is assume what you want there. So I'm going to make just a couple of little changes here, different from what we got here. So I don't need a count of the categories, okay? But what I do need is like a list of them, okay? So I want them kind of laid out, what exactly they are. Oops, I had to let somebody in, okay. So I need to, put down what they are. I don't want the values. I want actually like the names of the categories. So I'm going to drag that down, and that's now going to give me the categories. And what you always get here is more than you want. If you ever want an item you don't want that in, you simply take it out. So what I want is the costs, and I want those summarized. So a lot of times it's trial and error because whenever it sees an item like category, anything that doesn't have an amount, it tends to assume you want to count them up. But in this case, I really don't need that. So I now have my basic pivot table that I want. And then, of course, you can change this around. So it's a little bit of trial and error with pivot tables. But for example, right now I have the campus on the rows and I have the categories on the columns. I could actually switch it around. So I now have, each of the categories, have them both on the rows. I could have the campus on the columns with the books, with the categories on the rows. I can do a lot of different things, okay? And again, with 3 items, it's pretty simple. When you get to more, you get to more. So that's kind of the first step with a pivot table. This kind of the second step as you look at a pivot table is, how you can do different kinds of sorting. So one different kind of sorting you can do with a table is if you hit, and you're going to see this by the row label, a little bar, and you have your choices. So maybe I only want to look at 2 campuses, and now I have a little report for just those 2 campuses. Or maybe I want to look at all the campuses, but I don't want to necessarily look at all the categories. I want all I did there. Okay, I want all of them. I selected none of them. So I have all the categories, but maybe now I want to adjust the column labels. So maybe I only want to look at books and paper. And so I can do it that way, and now I'm going to get, what I need there. So a little bit easier way to do this, rather than to go to those bars on the side, is to create what's called a pivot slice. And I've already created a few here. I can actually get rid of them. So I'll show you how to do it again. Okay. But if you want, anytime you have an item, if you want to, you have to go to your pivot analysis. If you lose, if for some reason you lose like your field list, go to pivot analysis. And what you're going to see is up here, insert slicer. And it's going to ask me what do I want to slice of. Okay, so I want to slice by the two items we looked at. So I want to slice by campus. You can only do one at a time. And now I have a slice by campus. By the way, if I want to be fancy and pretty, as soon as I pull up my slices, it gives me a choice on color. So if I want a fancier color, so I can differentiate my slices, I can do that. And then I can come back and just do another one. So again, anytime I'm not in the pivot table, I'm not going to be able to get my items. I have to be able to click that, and that's when you're going to notice this thing that says Pivot Table Analysis and Design. If you're not in the pivot table, it's gone. If you're in it, you'll get it. So if for some reason you want to know how to get back to all this stuff, that's how you do it. You click in. So I want to create one other slicer. I want it by category. And so now I have my different slicers. And so now I can do all the same things that I did with hitting the labels a little bit easier doing it this way. So, for example, if I only want to look at central, I can do that. If I want to look at numerous ones, and obviously you can't see my keyboard strokes, but I'm going to hit the control key. On a Mac, it's the command key, and I'm going to hold it down and select whichever ones I want, and it'll give me those. If I want all of them, I can always go and click the top thing to go back to all, and then I can then at that point actually select which ones I don't want. Okay, so right now I'm looking at these four campuses. I can then also reduce the categories. Let's say I only want to look at paper and books, and what I'll do is just unselect these two, or I'll select the ones I want. That's actually easier. And now I have that. So I have an ability very quickly, even let's say even in a meeting, in presentations, to do this. Once I have any one of these pivots, I can then at that point print it. So I could do multiple analyses and have multiple printed sheets all off the same pivot table. So let me stop. Not too hard, pretty simple. Everybody got it? Yes, no? Yeah, you really got to play with it. Okay, so the only other thing I want to show you is just how you can kind of take this to another level. So again, in the interest of time, I created another little sample here. So basically, I have the same thing, okay? It's essentially the same category. Well, I switched it around. I have campus on the column and the items in the categories. And what I decided I was going to do was to create a, you know, like a chart. So this is a pivot table. This is a pivot chart. And basically the way I did it, and I already did, so I'm not going to do it again, is I simply selected one item and then highlighted what I wanted in my chart. So basically I would just scroll across and highlight, and then I would go on a Mac to insert and select my chart. And in this case, I picked a pie chart, okay? At that point, it'll produce a pie chart. But again, remember, I pick these cells. But as I do different things with the slicer, it's going to change what's in those cells. So right now, if I highlight these cells for a table, it's going to give me books. But if I switch the slicer, it'll give me something else. So imagine I'm doing a real-time presentation, and I want to talk about the distribution of, you know, of money for books by these campuses, and now all of a sudden I go, and now I can have one for paper. Now I have one for pens. Now I have one for toner. Now the reason it's changing is that when I do the highlight, I'm highlighting the cells. So the chart is based on the cells, including this first one, which is where it's getting the title. Okay, so as I'm hitting the slicer, I'm getting a little bit of a different, chart. I don't have to design each chart separately. Each one is responding to that situation, okay? So now it's possible to actually have multiple charts running simultaneously here. And again, I didn't necessarily do it for this one, but I could have one, for example, like this with programs. This is the one for the Connecticut schools. And I could have multiple ones running at the same time, okay? Multiple charts. Now, if you have a chart that involves, say, more than one item, and it's of the same type, you're best producing more than one pivot table. So you could create more than one pivot table off of a piece of data and have more than one slicer off that data, and then the ability to have what looks like a dashboard, okay? And you don't necessarily have to have either your chart or your slicer in the same worksheet as the pivot table itself. So I, for example, could say take this and copy it to a new worksheet and just paste it in. And likewise, I could do the same thing with my, obviously you'd need the slicer because otherwise you can't do anything with it. And I could copy that slicer into, I got to see which sheet I created. I think it's that one. Yeah, there we go. And paste that in. Now, even though I pasted it, it's still functioning off of the original pivot table. So I don't even necessarily have to have the pivot table in what I'm showing. And I'll try to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it better if I can zoom it in. So now watch what happens. I change to books, I change to paper. I don't even have my chart, my pivot table here. My pivot table is here somewhere else, but what I'm actually presenting is only this. So it's possible for me to have the pivot table with 3 different items, and now I've created like an active dashboard where you're seeing toner, you're seeing books, you're seeing prices, all on one page. And I know that's a little bit advanced, to actually produce a dashboard, but I think if you play with it, with the concepts, it shouldn't be too hard to knock one out. Any questions? And if I hear I think so, I'll assume you need to play with it for a while. Now, here's what I'm going to do to make your life easy. I'm going to give you this template with everything I've done. So you should have absolutely no problem playing with it, and I've even given you a whole bunch of additional sample data. So you have this set of data, the one I work with, you have this set of data, and you have this data on salaries. I even gave you another one. So you don't have to create your own data, and at that point, I think play around. Once you feel comfortable with it, then you can begin to start using actual data you have in your district or at the college. The only thing I would say, and just again, is make sure you have clean data, okay? And the clean data must have, when you select your pivot table, make sure your top line in the table includes the categories, because it automatically assumes your top row is your categories. Make sure there are no blank spaces, okay? Because if there are blank spaces, it's going to mess you up. You can have duplicate, and then watch out the duplicate item. The most common reason you might have a duplicate item is you might have a word like killingly, and then you've also got a word like killingly plus a space. And while they look visually the same, the Excel is going to treat them as 2 different items. So a good idea, if I go back just to this one we did before, the one with the campus supplies, is to pull just any one of the categories and notice if you're getting a duplicate. So here's an example. If I had just done this, right, and just done the categories and put them in the row, I want to actually have them all selected. And now I'm seeing like 2 books as opposed to saying 1 book. That's the sure sign that I got a book, and I've also got like like another one with book in a space, Or the same thing with the campuses. If I pull the campuses and I'm getting like 2 Killingleys, that's in this particular case, or two Gulf Coast region, it's because in one of them I have an extra space. Okay? All right. We're all good on pivots so far. I'm going to send this to you. You have this recording. It's not as hard as it looks. I will admit it's even for me, it's trial and error. But once you get to playing with it, it's pretty easy. Okay? All right, let's move on to what is going to be our main subject for today, which is data validation. Now, I know I've done data validation a little bit before with you, but what I want to kind of do is take this to another level and make sure that I'm covering all of the details, because there's actually a lot of really cool uses of data validation that I'm not sure I shared with you before, some of which I've just learned recently, and I'm really excited about because I've been using it locally with a couple of my districts, including, I know we have one person from Chappaqua, including doing a couple of things for the facilities department in Chappaqua in terms of developing forms for evaluations and walkthroughs and things like that. So it's been kind of cool. And you're going to learn how to do all the stuff that I have done here because it's not rocket science. So let's just start with the very basics with data validation and explain what it is. Data validation really explains what input Excel will accept in a spreadsheet. So the normal default, and I'm just going data validation, you're going to get this little box, dialog box, is any value, which means that normally Excel will allow you to put anything in the spreadsheet, okay, into that cell. This is by cell. And what we're going to talk about is what happens if there's a different thing where it's going to restrict in some way what you're allowed to put in. So the first thing and the most common thing that people learn is list, which is how to create a drop-down menu. And I know for some of you I went over this before. So there's a couple of ways you can do a drop-down menu. If it's a very small list, like paid and unpaid, or you've got a department with 3 people in them, usually it's just as easy to put down, just put it right in the source. So in this particular case, we have, let's say, cats, dogs, or I'll do cat, dog, fish. You know, as in like, what is your pet? You know, what's your pet? Okay? And what I have to do is separate each item by a comma. That's how it knows it's a distinctive item. So when I do that, what I'm going to get is a little bar on the side that's a drop-down bar, and then whatever one I select, it'll select them. Okay? So if you want to clear it out, all you have to do is hit the delete, and that'll clear it out. Now, once you have them, you can then copy them down. So now they're not just in that one cell, they're actually in all of these. Just one bit of advice, always make sure it's blank before you copy it down. Otherwise, it's going to copy the item down. So, for example, if I have dog and I now copy it down, I'm going to get all dog and then have to clear it out, okay? So I can certainly clear them out, but the easiest thing is to make sure that before I do the copying, I'm in this position, then I copy them down, okay? Now, I had cat, dog, and fish, okay? I can either select the cat by my drop-down menu, or I can type cat, it'll still take it, or dog. However, what if I put, it's a strange pet, but what if I put pig down? Or bird. Actually, let's do bird. That's a little more common. Okay, so what does it say? It says, won't accept it. And this is the whole notion of data validation, that not only do you have to select from a drop-down, but if you put in an item that is not, you know, within what is the validation parameter, it's going to reject it. Okay? Everybody clear? Now, what we have here now is a drop-down menu. But just by way of terminology, and I just put up the terminology so you'd know, there is this thing called a drop-down, and then this thing called a combo box. So a drop-down means you can only select the items that are included here. A combo box, while it provides you with a drop-down, it allows you to put other items in. So let me just give you another example so we're not doing cat, dog, and pig. But for example, right today I'm in Connecticut in a school district, and let's assume I was asking parents for, where they worked, or as a part of an input for their address at work, okay? And so I'm going to create a little, again, I'm just going to go how you do it. You go data validation, list. And now I'm going to put in the most common ones that you're likely to see. I'm in the Hartford area. New York would be Connecticut, obviously, is the most common. New York and Massachusetts, okay? So the only problem here is, and that's fine, what if I have somebody who works in Rhode Island? So now I go to put in Rhode Island, and they actually do have people who work in Rhode Island. It's not that far away, and it won't let me do it. So what can I do to change that? Well, if I go back in, by the way, if you ever want to change anything or see a validation, you simply select that cell, and you go through the process again. You go data validation, you find it, and then it'll pull up the dialog. You can make whatever you changes you want. So we're going to go, so the first tab that you get under the dialog box is the setting tab, but the one we want to look at is the error alert. Okay, now the default for error is stop, which means you put in anything else, I won't accept it, okay? I won't accept it. However, you can take that off simply by unchecking this check over here. So basically, if this check is unchecked, it doesn't do any sort of error or it doesn't reject an item, okay? So I now simply uncheck that. Now, I've still got the same box with the drop-down, right? But I also have an ability to put in something else, and it will take it. So it's a matter of choice of what you want. If you want to restrict what people put in, which is one of the good reasons to have a drop-down, then it would make logical sense to leave it unchecked, checked. If you want to allow for some flexibility, like, for example, it's not normally it might be parent and grandparent that you're asking about, but it maybe this time it's aunt. So you want a person to be able to fill in something else, then you would do a combo box. And then again, the only difference really is in the error message whether you have it checked or unchecked. All right? Any questions so far? Pretty easy, right? Now, there is another way, just one more thing, just a little trick, okay? So as you remember, I said that you could blank this out, and I know you can't see my keystrokes, but what I'm doing is I'm hitting the delete key to be able to wipe it out. But some people have said it would be nice if there were another way of doing that, where I could have almost like blank it out as a choice. Well, unfortunately, if you go here and try to put a blank in the front, it won't just work. Like if you put, let's say, spaces and a comma, even putting the double quotes, it won't work. However, there's a little trick, and it only works in Excel. It will not work in Google Sheets. By the way, Google Sheets also has data validation, but this is one of the differences where this doesn't work in Google Sheets, okay, is you put a dash in, and any word, it doesn't matter what word it is, pick, choose, select, another dash, and a comma, because it's the two dashes that are making this work. And now what's going to happen is you're going to see one of your choices up above is pick. If you select pick, it blanks it out. Okay? It's a choice, whether you like it or not. Everybody okay on that? So that's what we do if we have a really small list. If we had a very large list, or if we have something where we want to make it a little bit more dynamic, like, for example, if we had a list of all our employees in a department, we really wouldn't want to use that approach, okay? And so we have another alternative to how we can put items in. I'm just going to show you a couple of cute ones before we go a little bit deeper here. Okay, so I'm just picking a cell at random, one that doesn't have a drop-down in it already. Apparently that one does, okay? And I'm going to go again to data. I already have it up. That's right. Data validation list. But instead of actually putting the list in, I'm going to go over to the corner here, and I'm going to select this. It's going to ask me for a range, and I'm going to select my range. I'm going to give you a little trick. If you want an additional item, you go one cell above, so that'll leave you a blank. In this particular case, I don't want that, so what I'm just going to do is highlight the cells, and I'm going to hit Enter. Now, the only problem is I've got to remember where I was here. It isn't going to work. I think I was here. I may have to do it again because I don't remember where I put it. I think maybe it's over here. I'll find out. If not, I'll do it again. Okay, nope. That's one of the challenges. Always good to label before you do it. So, hey, you know, gives me another opportunity to go over how you do it. Okay, I'm going to make sure I put it over here in line with this. Okay, so I go what? I go data validation, list. I select that, and I select my items. And if I were not teaching, I would never make that mistake because anytime I ever put a drop down in it, I had an explanation for what it was next to it. And now I have a little scoring scale. You got 3 scales, you got 4 scales, you know, how well you were doing, like a rating system that I could build in through a drop down. Now here I have just a little check and minus. I could do the same thing with that. Go data validation, list, and I could just put my check in, and there we go. Okay. It's a check, it's an X. So am I boring you yet? Because that doesn't sound very exciting, right? Want to see a really cool example of its use? Okay, check this out. So this is an evaluation instrument. It happens to be for a facilities department, okay? And I have to tell you, I got the idea from one of the districts locally with me, and they're using it, and a couple of districts are using it, okay? So here's what we were finding out. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on anyone. I'm just telling you the truth. So we're finding out that many of the head custodians who are doing evaluations, let's just say writing is not their strong point. You know, I mean, they're able to write, but they're not really that comfortable doing it. So many of them were not really writing a lot on the evaluations. We were getting a lot of evaluations with not a lot of written information. So I got this idea. Actually, I got it from this program called IEP Direct, where when the teachers try to select goals for students, instead of trying to write them all from scratch, they pick them from lists. They can kind of select them. So I said, I got a great idea. I'm going to use data validation to create an evaluation instrument. Now, because this is a blank sample and I don't want to give real names, I can have all the names of all the employees in my department here and have that work. And I could have the locations of my buildings, but I just didn't fill that in here. But what I want to do is just show you what happens when I select an item. And I'll try to make it as big as I can here so you can see it. I can actually go a little even bigger than that. Okay, so you'll notice each one of these, what I basically did was I have a rating system. So you don't even have to type that in. They're either going to have need improvement, satisfactory, or good. Okay? And now, for each one of the categories, I created all types of words, a list of words. By the way, you'll notice there's a scroll. So you're not limited to the size of what you can visually see. You could actually have 50 or 60 or 70 items, like if you were going to have a list of all your employees in a department or all your students in a class or grade. I think once you get over about 50, it gets kind of cumbersome to scroll down, but you don't necessarily are not limited to say what you can visually see. So what happens is the person looks, they say, yeah, I think this is a good one, and they pick it, it goes in there, and then they can, I left them space to put up to 3 different statements about the person. Well, what happens if none of those statements really work? Maybe they want to say something that does not included there. Do they have the ability to do that? Absolutely, because what did I do when I set this up? I unchecked the box, so these are combo boxes, right? Okay, so I could write my own. And it'll allow it. So while I can select from the box, I also have the choice of something else. Now, I didn't do it on ratings because that's a strictly standard rating. And then I did this for all of the items. So where's my data set? It's not in the same sheet. I have a comment tab, and I'll just show you how I laid it out so you see it. So I prefer, you don't have to lay it out this way, but I prefer to lay all the items out in one widened column. So here I have my satisfactories. Here I have the item under job knowledge and performance. I did not select job knowledge and performance, but I did leave a blank space so I could leave the blank in there, and I just selected those. Then I had some other items under dependability, other items under safety, other items, and then I have the job titles, which I can also do as a drop down. Now, what's nice about this is at any time I can change one of these. Okay, so for example, now, if I change that, it won't automatically, dynamically change what I already wrote. Correct. Well, I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. If I used a combo box, I would still give them the drop down, but then they also could put their own if they wanted. That's the idea of a combo box. If I did not check, they would be restricted only to what I gave them. Okay? So, and that's really the difference between the two. If I wanted this to be open, now, by the way, you notice that I changed this one, yet this didn't change. It's not dynamic. However, as soon as I go to select my list again, the new one's there. So it's pretty easy. I could have this all developed and designed, and then as time goes on, I could make a change in the comments. I don't necessarily have to do all the redesign again. By the way, if you insert, you got to watch if you put a column, say, up here. But if I simply inserted another item, say, inserted a row, hold on one second before somebody came to learn what I'm doing. You're welcome to stay. I'm just doing a webinar until.
I was just making sure you were set. We did have a room for you.
Oh, well, I figured I'm doing here because this way, but I appreciate you doing that.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually had told Ed the library would be fine unless they were using it, you know.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. So sorry about that. Yes, this is a district I work with. They're very nice. So they had set up a room for me, but I went to the place where I'm going to do the next training because I figured this way I don't have to go. But you don't need to know that. But anyway, if I insert a row here, like a blank row, I'm good because it's within this range. And then I could add an additional item. It'll automatically adjust the range. I'll just put my name so you see that. And so now when I go back to the evaluation instrument, again, won't change it there. You will see that my name is one of the choices. Okay? Any questions? And yet all the items are still there. It didn't take out the one on the bottom. Okay? We're good? So I'm sure you could think of, I've done walkthroughs. I've done, I'm working now on a bus like a thing that bus drivers can use when they, inspect their buses in the morning. In Chappaqua, we did a walkthrough when we do walkthroughs through the buildings. So I'm finding a lot of uses for this. Now, this is these are non-financial uses. And then there's certain of all the ways that I can include a drop-down box in things I'm doing, including having, if I have to send a report to a particular teacher or to a student, having all of their names in drop-down so I don't have to. Yes, exactly, because, and I'll show you why they're able to do that again, just to review it again. Because if you go into the validation, this box was unchecked. If it were checked, they would not be able to put in their own item. Okay? All right. So we're going to go back and look. Now we're going to we're going to look at a couple of other choices on data validation. Okay? So this next one, well, actually, let's start with I'll kind of build it up piece by piece, so we're starting the simpler ones before we go to harder ones. So if you notice, there were other types of validations here besides data validation. besides drop downs. So I want to look at a few of them. Okay. So the next one I want to look at is a date. And that actually has a lot of practical uses. Okay. So actually, let me set it up beforehand so you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Suppose that I have a form for people to fill out to create a purchase order, and I'm sure you all know what a purchase order is. Okay. And I would almost guarantee that all your school districts and the University of Southern Mississippi all operate on a school year, a fiscal year rather than a calendar year. And typically the fiscal years tend to be, they start on July 1st and they end on June 30th. Is that correct? If you know. Yes, no? Okay, yeah, pretty common, okay? So what I want to do, what always happens is people are putting in things in the wrong year. And this especially happens around June, you know, where people are trying to put in purchase orders for July when the year isn't up. Or they're putting in last year's, okay? So I can use data validation to solve that problem for me. So what I do is I go into data validation and I select date. Now, I have a lot of options. It could be after a particular date, but the most common one is between, okay? So I select the two dates. The only dates that will allow are between these two times, okay? So I'm going to do the typical one. I'll do this year. So I'll do 7/1/17 to 6/30/18. And here's one of those ones where you wouldn't want the check to be checked. You want it to check for it. Okay, so now let's see what happens when I put different dates in. If I put in a date that is, you know, within the fiscal year, like today, 2/8/18, no problem, takes it. Okay, but what if I try to go beyond the year? Maybe I'm now in June and I try to put a July. So I put July 5th, 18, I get a what? Sorry, can't do it. Not valid. Doesn't work. You're outside the parameter. Okay? So now I want to show you something else. If you look at this, and it's hard to zoom it in too much because dialog boxes won't let me zoom a dialog box. But what it says is the value you entered is not valid. That's a generic answer that Excel gives as a default. But one of the things I really like about this, particularly in Excel, not as many choices in Google Sheets, but in Excel, it's really great, okay? When you go to the error alert, you also have the ability to write a message of your own, okay? So obviously this is a message I would not put in, okay? But we can have some fun. Hey, dummy. Okay? Okay, so now let's see what happens. Nothing happens if I get, whoops, what happened? Excel exploded on me. I'll have to reopen it. I apologize. I guess it was mad at me for writing dummy. We'll see. We'll see how much of it got me, whether it saved it before I went. You see, it didn't like the message. I'm going to try it again, though. Okay? Dummy. Okay. And I hit OK. Now what happens is when I put in a date, if I put in a date that's fine, nothing happens. Look what happens if I put in a date that's after the fiscal year. What do I get? I get my message. Dummy, this must be between 7:1:17 and 6:30:18. Clearly, that wouldn't be the message we would write, but it does allow us to put in a more detailed message explanation so the person's not simply getting bumped out and they don't know why. Okay? Now, I can also do something. This may be overkill, but I can do this as well. I can also put an input message in, okay? So this is kind of like instruction. So I'm basically typing, make sure your value, make sure your date is in the fiscal year. And I have that as an okay. Now watch what happens when I select, I'll see if I can make this a little bit bigger. See, those don't get any bigger. The boxes get bigger, but the message doesn't. But what you'll actually see is it says, it actually gives you a little cue. Make sure that you that your date is in the fiscal year. Okay. By the way, you can do that for any cell, even one that doesn't have a restriction. Okay. So, for example, okay. I'm just going to make this less big for a second. We'll just go to normal cell. All right, so this is just a cell in my spreadsheet, okay? And what I can do is I can go to data validation and have any value. So that's just the value, and then still put in an input message. Like, for example, please put in your full legal name. So I'm not getting people going, Debbie, not Debbie, but like, some nickname, okay? And whenever I select that box, they'll get that message. So you have an ability to also put a message. By the way, I'll show you where the two are so you know the difference. You go to data validation. This is an input message. The other is an error alert. So input messages work on any cells. They're kind of before you do anything. You'll only get an error alert if you have a stop. Okay? Let me stop. Any questions? Anything you want me to go over again? Does it all make sense? Yes? No? Okay, so I want to show you a couple of other ones. So I'm in a high school. And I, by the way, would probably do this with a drop-down, but I just want to show you that you have other options. So I could do data validation, and my high school only has 3 grades. The stop means it will reject the item. If you're not stopping, it'll let you put the item in. If you have stop, it won't let you put it in. Okay? So it basically tells you, and it pops the alert out, and it won't let you enter what you're trying to enter. Okay? And I think that'll make sense in a few minutes when I show you some of the other options besides stop. There's actually 2 other options. Okay? But let's look at another one. One of them is whole numbers. But you have an ability here to put between as well. Doesn't have to be between. It could be more than, but between is the normal default. So let's say my high school is 9 to 11, the 9 to 11 high school. So I have ninth grade to 11th grade. If I do 9 to 11, if the person tries to put in 5, it's going to reject that item. It'll just tell me retry. It won't let me put in a 5. And in fact, you're seeing this. I'm putting in a 5. I'm putting in a 6. It won't take it. How you doing? Oh, did you leave anything, or are you here for the training?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. So, oh, that's fine. So it won't take it. Okay. Now, what happens? Remember, we did 9 to 11. If I do 10, it'll accept it. Okay. So my data validation restricted that to only putting in 9, 10, or 11. Now, what I said is I probably would have preferred having just a drop down that allowed you to do 9, 10, or 11. But, you know, there may be other items where I can't do that. Okay. Here's another possibility. One I don't use much, but some people may. Okay, you can also put a time, like a start time and an ending time, or just like a start time, like greater than, or greater than or equal to. And you can actually put a time of day. Now, so why would you use that? Well, actually, you might use between. Suppose that I were, again, in a facilities department, and I was responsible for building use with who rents space in the building. Well, I can't have them rent space before school is over, and we don't allow any events past, say, 9:30. So if you're making a request, you're the Boy Scouts or whatever, and you're requesting a time that you want to have that space available, and you're asking for a time that's not available, it will reject your time, and then you get a message. You know, you may get an error message that says, I'm very sorry, these are the only times when the space is available for building use. Questions? Okay, so now we're going to look at the most advanced one. Okay. And that's actually custom. And there's actually a lot of uses for custom, but I have to go over the syntax with you because it's a little complicated, okay? So data validation, and I'm going to go to custom, okay? And so what you have to do here is it depends on what you're doing. You could actually have a formula here. So I'm going to give you just a very simple formula. And let me make sure I don't mess it up, okay? So what I have to do is in equals, I'm actually going to select the cell. And by the way, I wish it let me input it. Well, I think actually if you do it that way, it may. Let me try. I can actually select the cell, right? And so what I say is if the item in that cell that you enter is greater than 1,000, I'll take it, okay? Actually, it's the other one. It's less than 1,000. That's what I actually wanted. Okay, so now let me give you my example here. It's not unusual in finance in public sector institutions to have a limit to, checks. In other words, any check that's above a certain amount requires like an extra signature or an extra process, okay? So in this particular case, I had set this up, and I'll just show you what it says here. So it has anything over 1,000, reject it, okay? So I put in 500, takes it. I put in, actually if I put in 1,000, it'll take it as well because I didn't do greater than or equal to. It won't let me do it, okay? So I can actually restrict an amount that people can put in, like a per diem for travel, etc., okay? So in this particular case, it rejected it. And again, I didn't write it yet because I wanted to show you how you would do it. I can actually go in there and write a more detailed error message here, which says it could be a warning, all checks over $1,000 require prior approval. And so this way, when I put it in, when the person puts it in and they're wondering why they're not getting it, they're being told why. But it won't allow them to do it, okay? All right. So the second example, and I've got to go into the data validation to show you this. So in the data validation, welcome. I'm doing a webinar until you guys start, so that's why. But don't worry, okay? We're going to wrap up in 5 minutes. So, okay, so I want to actually go to the first one. Maybe if I go to the first one, it'll be clearer. So if I go to the first one and I do data validation, you'll notice here it said stop. And you would ask me about that, Pam, stop. But there are actually two other options, information and warning, okay? Information and warning. So I'm actually going to do information first to show you what happens with that one. So it's really the same setup. So the formula is exactly the same, but instead of having it say stop, it says information. So what's going to happen is it's going to give you like an informational warning when you put in the amount. So if you put in an amount that's under, no big deal. If you put in an amount that's over, you're going to get a warning. It's going to say this requires a second signature. Now, it's not stopping you from doing it, but it's warning you, okay? And we're going to wrap up in a minute, okay, because the crowd's rushing in, okay?
They're doing good, yeah.
I'm not going to be able to compete with this for very much longer. But anyway, so let me just show you the last one, then we'll wrap up, okay? In my last one, instead of doing information, I did warning. Now, look what happens when I do this. Again, the formula is exactly the same, right? Instead of rejecting it, it's going to warn me. But it's going to make me choose. See, in the other one, it just told you we're over. This one actually requires me to do what? Affirmatively say yes. If I say no, it won't take the data. If I say yes, I have to actually say it. So I'm now like affirmingly acknowledging that, in fact, that item, okay? So we got to wrap up because I'm going to start something else in about 2 minutes. Any last questions? I'm going to make the recording available and this template that includes all these items, so you should be able to look at what I did and play along. We're all good? So I want to thank you all for coming, and I'll see you next time. Have a good day.